Okay. So federalism, the legislative branch, and then if we have time, the executive branch. And again, this is something where you just get to kind of like attend, sit there and write. Try not to give yourself carpal tunnel too bad, because we are going to be writing kind of quick. And if you have questions while I'm talking, ask me, okay? That is perfectly fine. I want to make sure that if I go over something that you're questioning, hey, Nayab, hi, Nikhil, that I address it and we're all solid and we're all okay, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, honey. Okay, that's great. Can you say hi to my students? Say hi. Okay, say bye. We're homesick. It's croup. It's croup. It's an awful, awful cough. They sound like a seal barking. You ever heard it before? It's the worst. Hey, Lindsay. Hey, Peyton. Nice to see y'all. Okay, so go ahead and title your first bit of notes for today, Federalism. And Nikhil, I said hi to you. I don't know if you heard me, but I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Hi.
Hi, buddy. So nice to see you. Such a long time. And by the way, guys, I definitely mentioned to one of our administrators that I was planning on having a little study thing the morning of the test, and they didn't shoot it down. So I'm going with it. I'm going with it. Okay. I'm going with it. And if you show up, I will have a little present for you. Okay. Honey, remember we talked about this? I'm having my meeting. I don't know where that book is, sweetie, but you can get some different paper. But listen, come here. Listen, I need to, no, this is mommy's. I need to talk to these people today, okay? So you've got to stay over there.
One's the same.
Yes, we have the same pen. Okay, bye. Sorry. Braden! Hey, stranger! All right, let's talk my favorite F word, federalism. All right, the first thing that I want to make sure that you know, and if you attended our first Zoom session last week, you should remember this, is make sure that you do not confuse federalism with separation of powers. Federalism, and this is what I would write down if I were you, is the division of power between state and the national government. All right, so the division of power between states and the national government. So today we're going to talk about things that the federal government can do. We're going to talk about things that the state governments are able to do, and we're going to talk about things that they both can do. So why don't you just really quickly draw a table with, 3 columns to it. It doesn't have to be a big table. I'm just going to write 3 or 4 things. And on one, I'd like you to write federal. Like this. The one in between, I'd like you to write both. And then on the one on the outside, you should write state. Okay. By the way, anybody recall what the powers are that both the national and state governments can do? It's concurrent. Okay, concurrent. So I would make sure you get that. So I'm going to go ahead and write concurrent in the chat. Okay, could you see that? Great. Awesome, concurrent. So one thing that the federal government can do, but that state governments cannot do, is coin money, right? That is a power denied to the states in the Constitution. It is something set aside for the federal government because of all of the issues created when all 13 states could coin their own money during the Articles of Confederation. However, both of them can tax. That's probably your best example of a concurrent power. If you're asked to name one, there you go. The power of taxation, right? Let's just stick with the federal side for now. A few other things that are just for the federal government and federal government only: foreign relations. So making treaties, anything of that nature, states back off. That is just for the federal government. Also, everything surrounding naturalization, that's just for the federal government. That is not for the states to decide or to determine. And then one more example of something that is set aside for the federal government and the federal government only is the power to declare war. Okay. Hi, Riley. Hi, Gloria. Hi, Gloria. We're talking about federalism. Okay. So coining money, foreign relations, naturalization powers, and declaring war, that's just the federal government. Concurrent powers, we already identified taxation. Another thing you could write down is the power to enact laws. And that's where the states can get themselves into some hot water, right? With federalism. Yeah. And we'll talk more about that. And then things that are set aside for the state governments, just for the states. Hey, Gavin, we're talking about federalism and things that are just for state governments. Education. And next to education, if you want to put in parentheses, US versus Lopez, not a bad idea, right? Not a bad idea. And then underneath education, you can write marriage laws and elections, because states conduct elections, which is why part of the reason why the new Georgia voting law is getting so much national attention. Because of some of the things that it includes that some people have a problem with and that other people think are great. Now, is it safe to say that there are disagreements between the state and national government on occasion over some things? Yeah, I think that's safe to say, right? So if there is a disagreement, what branch decides who is right? I know you're saying it. I can see you voicing it. Yeah, the judicial branch. So you might want to write this down. The judicial branch decides. Cool, Willow. Sorry. Judicial branch decides when there are disagreements. Okay. And why don't we write down a couple of examples? Maybe a couple of examples of our, I don't know, required court cases. Roe versus Wade. That was an example of states and the federal government disagreeing, right? Well, it was actually an example of states disagreeing with each other and the federal government finally having to weigh in. But now lots of states disagree with the federal government. Are there states out there that would not like to offer women the opportunity to terminate a pregnancy? Yes, you live in one. So there you go. There's an example. Also, Mccullough versus Maryland. So we wrote Roe v. Wade, issue of privacy, Mccullough, Maryland. And that was the national bank, right? Maryland didn't like the national bank. And so they taxed it, saying that it couldn't be there. They didn't want it in their state. Well, sorry, Maryland, you lost that one. Supremacy clause, hello. And then US v. Lopez is another one having to do with the national school, national gun fun free. I just wrote national fun free. Schools are not fun free zones. We have a lot of fun. National gun, oh my God, I did it again. Gun free school zones act. And that of course having to do specifically with the Commerce Clause, right? So all of those are examples of when there is disagreement over the issue of federalism, the judicial branch having to step in. I anticipate the judicial branch might need, well, they've also stepped in with marijuana, right? We talked about this, how in California they passed a law saying that marijuana was legal for medicinal purposes, yet according to federal law, it's legal for no purposes, right? The government can say no production of marijuana. But states are still trying to legalize it. So that's just, that is federalism in action, folks, and looking at whether or not it's going to be okay. So there you go. All right, are we okay so far? Give me thumbs if we are. Oh, so nice to see those thumbs. All right, you know what I want to talk about? I want to talk about cake. And you know what I mean when I say I want to talk about cake? I want to talk about layer cake federalism, also known as dual. And then I want to talk about marble cake federalism, also known as cooperative. Okay. So dual federalism versus cooperative federalism. And if on your AP exam, this is one of those FRQs, guys, you can totally write layer cake and marble cake and get full credit. Okay. It's just more fun. And if you have time at the end and you want to draw a layer cake, that's fun too. Your reader will enjoy it. Okay. So dual federalism or layer cake federalism, it's important that you know that there's very limited overlap between the federal and the state in terms of who does what. Very limited overlap, right? In a layer cake, it's really easy to see where each layer is, right? Because it's separated by icing if you do it correctly. You always separate it by icing. That's how the layers stay. Or I mean, let's say you're even getting fancy and you've got a layer of like chocolate, a layer of strawberry, a layer of chocolate. Sounds really good. Again, there's limited overlap. You know what you're getting with each layer. You know the icing is the state. You know the cake is the federal. The icing is the state. The cake is the federal. So their roles are separate from each other. Okay. Prior to the New Deal, this is how it worked. Okay. Prior to the New Deal, this is how it worked. And hopefully you're getting that this is probably something that would have been favored more so by Democratic Republicans, strict constructionists, right? You stay in your area, we stay in our area, that sort of thing. On the other side, you do have cooperative federalism, also known as marble cake federalism, where who does what is a little bit more jumbled, right? If you have a true blue marble cake, it's going to be hard for you to separate the chocolate layer from the vanilla layer because it's all swirled together, looking very pretty. She's just going to keep doing that, guys. So just prepare. Okay. Just prepare. Obviously, she's feeling better. Medicine is great. So there is more overlap or more interplay between the states and the federal government with cooperative federalism. And that, I think that really kind of points to the complex interaction that can take place between, you know, the different levels of government. Notice I'm not saying branches, I'm saying levels, right? National and state. We really started to see this more with the New Deal. And hey guys, if you want to be a little bit more current, you could cite the pandemic. Didn't we see a lot more government overreach or government assistance or government involvement from the federal government during the pandemic? And states requesting assistance and receiving it? Good. Good. I'm glad we're getting that. Okay, the next, okay, so how are we there? Are we good? We get those? Fabulous. Love you.
Did we ever touch on state powers that are exclusive to them?
Just for states? So things like educational policy, Lucy, marriage policy, election law, as long as they're not being discriminatory, then they're probably going to be able to do what they want, which is a great example of marriage, right? Georgia didn't want to allow gay marriage, but the Supreme Court ruled that not allowing two people to marry because they're the same gender, that's discriminatory.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. Really, that's why we're here, guys. That's why you're here. Okay. I want to talk now about federal grants and aid. Okay, federal grants and aid. And we're going to talk about three things. One, categorical grants. Two, block grants. And three, mandates. Everybody's favorite. So categorical grants, block grants, and mandates. Okay. Show me with your fingers, 1, 2, or 3. 1 categorical, 2 block, 3 mandates. Which one do states like the best? They love block grants. They love them. I mean, if your parents hand you $40 and say, here's money for gas, you're like, thanks, that's nice. But if your parents hand you $40 and say, go have fun, don't you prefer the latter? Yes. Yes, so do states. So categorical grants, this is money to state and local governments. Money to state and local governments with specific instructions.
If you get to the candy house, you win.
Yes, if you get to the candy house in Candyland, you win. So, specific instructions. Let's write down a couple of examples, shall we? Head Start is a good example of money that comes via categorical grant. That's the like preschool in less privileged areas or less affluent areas, right? That's paid for by the government. Also, Medicaid is a good example of a categorical grant. It's money that comes to the federal government, but it does have more specific parameters of what it needs to be used for. The states have a little bit of wiggle room, but not a ton, okay? Categorical grants, but still, they're not paying it for themselves, so they are appreciative, right? Okay, next block. And this is money that is more broad in purpose, okay? More broad in purpose. There's less strings attached. So if you use it for a specific thing and you've got less or you've got some left over, hey, that's okay. So like food stamps, TAMF, assistant for needy families, temporary assistance for needy families, like welfare, those now come to states via block grants. So that's why some states will offer just the minimal and some states will offer even more. So there's less strings attached. There's more state autonomy. Guys, this is an example of enabling something called devolution. Do you guys remember that term, devolution? It's like evolution, but devolving. It's what it is it's returning authority to states, right? Giving states a little bit more of a say, a little bit of more power in what they're talking about.
Is the definition of devolution in this class the same as the one in AP Human Geography?
I don't know. What is the definition in AP Human?
So in AP Human, it's like things becoming more federal and like states getting more power. Like it's individual areas. It's a less centralized government, like control.
Yeah.
There's a central government, but then there's also local.
Yeah, that works. That totally works. And Freed used to teach AP Gov, so that works.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to keep them separate.
No need, no need. Just know that the states like devolution because they're getting more autonomy.
Does devolution go with block grants or is that just its own little thing?
Well, block grants are a way to enable devolution, Ella, but devolution can occur without the financial assistance from the government. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you guys for asking these questions. This is so much better. So much better. It's helpful. Okay. Let's talk mandates, right? You know what it means if something is mandatory. It means you have to do it. So mandates are federal directives, okay? Federal directives, mandates. So the state and local government has to comply with the requirements. And sometimes if they do, then they get a little something in return, okay? Sometimes. For example, you knew this was coming. The Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984, where the federal government wanted states to raise the drinking age to 21. And they said, if you do this, we will give you federal highway funds. Yay! Everybody needs federal highway funds. Please pick up on the fact that if they didn't do it, it meant they would stop receiving federal highway funds. At least a little bit. You guys are, you're picking up on that, right? Good. States need these. States need these to keep roads paved. I mean, you guys know paving roads, it's just ongoing. Every time there's construction on 75, you're just like, bah. Okay. Also the, now, unfunded mandates. There are unfunded mandates. Okay. States hate these. States don't really like mandates. They don't, because they think they should have as much power as is humanly possible to do what they want to do. But an unfunded mandate especially rubs them the wrong way, because they're told they have to do it and they're given no money to do it, no reward for doing it. It's just the federal government said you had to do it. And a great example of this would be the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, the ADA. And guys, that was a big to do. It involved a lot of things, a lot of ramps, a lot of elevators being, built, a lot of Braille being used, a lot of handicap accessible restrooms, etc. So that's an unfunded mandate. Now, when you think about federalism, I want you to think back to the good old Federalist versus anti-federalist debate, right? Your Federalists are going to favor that strong government. Your anti-federalists are going to favor a weak central government. They really were okay with the Articles of Confederation. Also, if we're thinking about that, factor in, the Federalist Papers and factor in Brutus I for the anti-federalists. Remember, and why don't we go ahead and write down Brutus I? Brutus I, and feel free to write down anti-federalist perspective. Okay. Or in the FRQ world, viewpoint, right? Brutus had a viewpoint that the federal government was going to become too strong, making state governments obsolete. I'll write that down. Federal government would grow too strong, making state governments obsolete. Now, show me with your heads here. Is the federal government a little bit more powerful than it was at the writing of the Constitution? Yes. Yes, it is. And that's pretty much because of two clauses in the Constitution. Okay, so let's title our next little heading, Federal Government Power Expands. And let's write those two clauses. I bet you know what they are. You guys recall those? Necessary and proper and supremacy? Good, good. I'm glad. I'm supremely happy because this is necessary knowledge. Okay. So through the necessary and proper clause, let's again write down the case, Mccullough versus Maryland. Okay. Mccullough versus Maryland. Because if you recall, SCOTUS basically approved implied powers, which come from the necessary and proper clause. Sorry, I can't see what I'm writing, so I'm sure it's going to have a typo. And then remember also in that case, when Maryland tried to tax the national bank, SCOTUS again said no, because it was a violation of the Supremacy Clause. And guys, you should know that comes in Article 6. I can't imagine they'll ask you that because I mean, really, but come on, but that's where it's from, Article 6. So in that one case, not only do we approve implied powers, but we also back up the federal government if it goes up against the states in any sort of conflict. I'd love to give you a few modern examples of the usage of the necessary and proper clause. Prohibiting discrimination. That's one. In the Constitution, it doesn't say that Congress can prohibit discrimination. It does in the 14th Amendment. And then in lots of pieces of legislation like the Civil Rights Act. So prohibiting discrimination is a modern use of the necessary and proper clause. Also, regulating controlled substances. Drugs are not mentioned in the Constitution, y'all. But Congress does regulate them, right? Yeah. Now, I do want you to be able to recall one example of the federal government power not expanding, but rather being checked. And that's through the case US versus Lopez. All right. I do want to ensure we've got that one. And if you guys recall, US versus Lopez was about the Gun-Free School Zones Act, which Congress said they could enact due to their power in the Commerce Clause. Basically, they tried to say we should be able to say that guns can't come on school campuses because that will help businesses in the area. Everybody will feel safer. And the Supreme Court said, no. Sorry, that's an overreach. I mean, that's a serious overreach. No, not going to work. Okay. So this was an example, and I think the first time in like 60 years that Congress's power was checked under the Commerce Clause. The first time since maybe, I don't know, maybe sometime in the 60s, because it was upheld with the Heart of Atlanta motel case in 1964. Okay. Last but not least, for federalism, we must talk about states' rights. And that comes from the 10th Amendment, which gives states reserved powers. Okay. And I know we mentioned some of them already, but you really do need to know that if it's not in the Constitution, that means it's up to the states. The states can figure it out. Like driving, drinking, those things. Okay? Federalism. You all right there? Yeah. Anybody got a question? Well, then let's move on and let's talk about the legislative branch. Unit 2 is where most of your questions are going to come from. The Constitution is where most the FRQ information is going to come from. Okay. So it makes sense that if we're talking about the legislative branch, that we start with what we know about them from the Constitution. Okay. So just write legislative branch, real big, real pretty. Oh, good. And that was exactly half of our time. That was what I'd planned. Perfect. Okay. Bye, Gloria. Sounds good, sweetie. The first thing that I want to do is I want us to differentiate between enumerated and implied powers. So enumerated, also known as expressed, also known as delegated. You could see them as anything on the AP test. Enumerated means expressed, means delegated powers versus implied powers. And we're going to write down five in each category, okay? And don't forget to put implied powers come from the necessary and proper clause. Just want to make sure you know that. The express powers come from Article 1, Section 8, and that's also where implied powers come from, Article 1, Section 8 in that one line. Okay, the first thing that you need to know about implied powers is they must reasonably connect to an express power. They cannot stand on their own, because that's what the necessary and proper clause says. It says Congress has the power to do whatever is necessary and proper for carrying into execution their foregoing express powers. So how about we write in the, why don't we write in the implied power first, and then we'll look at the express power that it's derived from. So an implied power for the first one, it's 3, but it fits under 1. Creating a budget, that's an implied power. The budget is not mentioned in the Constitution. Creating a budget, funding entitlement programs, and funding infrastructure, okay? Those are 3 things that I'm calling number 1. Creating a budget, funding entitlement programs, and funding infrastructure.
Mommy,
Yes, dear.
Arlo was next to me, but now he got peppermint.
Arlo got the peppermint in Candyland, guys. That means he's got to go all the way back to the beginning. Arlo is our stuffed dog, by the way. All righty. All of those things are implied. They're not in the Constitution. I'm glad this is bringing you some happiness. They're not in the Constitution, right? But the express power that Congress has that gives Congress the power to do these things is the power to tax and spend. So that's what you should write on the express power side that connects to what you just wrote on the implied power side. Does that make sense? Okay. Congratulations, Willow.
I got to the candy.
Good job. High five. All right. Thanks, Willow. Okay. Next up, second implied power. Oh my gosh. Banning production of marijuana. Yeah. Banning production of marijuana. The federal government can do that. Go over the express power side. They get the power to do this. It's not in the Constitution. I mean, guys, marijuana is not in the Constitution. They get the power to do this by regulating interstate commerce. That's the express power. That's the enumerated power. That's a delegated power. These things are in the Constitution word for word. There's not any confusion on them because it says it right there that they can do it. Okay. Okay. Our next implied power, how about the national bank? You could have even put for today the Federal Reserve System, right? Scoot over to the express power side, coin money. Yeah, having a bank is going to help them coin money and regulate its value, just like the Federal Reserve helps them do that today. Go back to the implied power side. Number 4. And this is for mail. Or you know what? Let's do the express power first. Let's change it up with this one. The express power for number 4 is establish post offices. Yeah. Establish a postage system, right? The implied power is that there's some like serious mail fraud crimes, guys. Serious mail crimes. Congress can make those, MAIL. Congress can make those mail laws, right? Because they have the express power to establish post offices. And then let's do one more express power, expressed, raising and supporting an army. For the implied power here, let's go with draft. Don't you think? That's a great example, right? Also creating an Air Force. That's another example. The draft, the Air Force, not in the Constitution, but because Congress can raise and support an army, it makes sense that Congress can do those things. Are we good there? Yeah? Did that help to see where the express power came from? Good. Nice. I like the postage system, Lucy. That's good. Let's talk about a few things that Congress can't do. So let's write down Congress can't. One thing they can't do is tax exports. Why would we want to punish ourselves? They can't pass ex post facto laws. Remember those where it punishes you after the fact? They cannot violate the Bill of Rights. Or suspend habeas corpus, except in times of rebellion. And even then, it's usually the president that does that, so, okay. Those are all things that Congress can't do. And guys, those are expressly denied to Congress. It says in the Constitution that Congress can't do it. There's no up in the air about it. It's very clear, no. No. Okay. Okay. What I want to do now is I want to look at the differences between the House and the Senate. You want to make a big table for me? And y'all, you will see a question on this, okay? Let's start with the House, okay? And then the Senate. And let's write down qualifications, right? For the House, 25 years old, citizen 7 years, live in the state, right? 25 years old, citizen for 7 years, live in the state. Now show me with your fingers. Does the Senate have like higher qualifications or lower qualifications? Higher. Good, good, good. So for the Senate, you got to be 30, a citizen for 9 years, and yet again, live in the state where you're chosen. Guys, the Senate is the bigger deal. We get that, right? There's 435 representatives, yes. There's 100 senators, bigger deal. Another thing that points to why it's a bigger deal. How many years or terms for representatives? Show me with your hands. Representatives, how long are their terms? 2 years, right? How long are terms for senators? I gotcha. 6 years. Yeah, 6 years, right? Representatives 2 years, senators every 6 years. So every election, this past election that happened to be a general election and presidential, the president was up for re-election. All 435 seats in the House were up for re-election. But this you might want to write down. In the Senate, only 1/3 of them were up for re-election. Only 1/3, because the Senate is something called a continuous open body. A continuous open body. They don't want all of them to be up for re-election at the same time, because that would create a massive reorganization, right? It would be ridiculous. Now, we know that usually when representatives and senators run for re-election, are they going to win? The vast majority of the time, yes. In the House of Representatives, it's been, the re-election rate has been as high as like 98%. In the Senate, it's a little bit less because they've had 6 years to be there. Maybe they've made some more unpopular decisions. And that's something else we should write down. Senators are more likely to act as trustees. Senators are more likely to act as trustees. Whereas representatives are more likely to act as delegates. Yeah. And if you recall, a delegate believes that they're there to voice the will of the people. So for a delegate for a representative to do something unpopular, it's a BFD. It doesn't really happen that often, okay? But senators are going to be more likely to maybe make some of those decisions that they think aren't good for the public in the long term. Sure, it's what the public knows now or feels that they want now, but it may not be best for them later on, okay? Part of that is because the senators represent the state. You should write that down. Senators represent the state as a whole, right? Whereas representatives represent a district. They're much closer to their people. Which is why representatives are directly elected by the people. You should write that down. Representatives are directly elected by the people. That was an example of the founding fathers giving regular people an opportunity to really feel a part of their government, right? But the Senate in the beginning were not. So you should write that down. It's the 17th Amendment that allows for direct election of senators. Okay, the 17th Amendment. So that's an example of the founding fathers kind of embracing elitism, guys, for the Senate, but it's also an example of the founding fathers embracing participatory democracy for the House. Okay. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to write down some of the specific things that each body does. Okay. So if you want, you can kind of do what I did. I drew a line underneath where I just kind of wrote qualifications and characteristics. And now I'm going to write responsibilities or powers, however you want to word it. Okay. Okay. For the House, you need to know, initiate all revenue bills. Initiate all revenue bills. Anybody recall the name of the committee that does that in the House of Representatives that I would know if I were you? Nod, nod, hint, hint, wink, wink. It's Ways and Means, okay? And it's just in the House. Ways and Means. I'll put it in the chat. Okay. All righty. Also in the House of Representatives, this is where they can impeach, right? So you should know that. They can impeach. And I definitely want you to put in parentheses what vote is needed to impeach. Simple majority. Simple majority, right? That's 50% plus one vote. 50% plus one vote. And then one more thing I would know about the House if I were you is that they choose the president if the Electoral College cannot. And we're going to write why that is. They choose the president if the Electoral College cannot. Because they are the truest representation of majoritarian popular democracy. The House is the truest representation of majoritarian popular democracy. They're elected every 2 years. They represent districts. They can be younger. They don't have to be citizens as long. There's more of them. They're directly chosen. I mean, do you see all of the evidence that supports that statement? Yeah? Okay. Go over to the Senate side for things that they can do specifically. Okay, they ratify treaties. They ratify treaties. And y'all, it's a supermajority. It's a 2/3 vote. Put that in parentheses. You're definitely going to be asked to identify some of those things that require a supermajority vote. Our last Zoom session, we talked about how proposing amendments do and ratifying amendments do. 2/3 to propose, 3/4 to ratify. Treaties is a 2/3 vote, which if you stop and think about it, makes sense. Also, they can try an impeached official. They can try an impeached official. And to remove them, again, 2/3 vote. So yet another supermajority. They can choose the vice president if the Electoral College cannot. So we could technically have a president of one party and a vice president of another party, guys. We could, if the Electoral College didn't decide. And last but not least, they ratify ambassadors and cabinet members. Or they approve, I'm sorry. Ratify is the wrong word, forgive me. Confirm, that's the word I wanted. So they confirm ambassadors, and don't, do me a favor, don't write cabinet members there, even though that's true. Confirm ambassadors and judges, okay? Confirm ambassadors and judges. There's a reason I don't want you to write the cabinet there, okay? Everything that you just wrote, all of those powers, those are expressed. That's important. I want you to know that. Everything you just wrote, that comes from the Constitution. It's in there. It says it. Two things for the Senate that are not in the Constitution. Or one thing that is not are cabinet picks. They can confirm cabinet picks. Okay. Oh my gosh, and I can't believe I forgot about this. Actually, it makes sense to bring it up later. I'll bring it up. I understand the process, I promise. Okay, draw a line under that. And now let's look at leadership. Real quick. The leadership in the House is the Speaker of the House, right? So in the House of Representatives, it's the Speaker, then the majority party leader, then it's the whip, okay? That's the leadership in the House. And by the way, in the 25th Amendment, the Speaker of the House is part of the order of succession of the president. Okay, the Speaker is part of the order of succession. If the president dies or is incapacitated and the vice president does as well, the Speaker becomes president. In the Senate, okay, bye, Nikhil, thank you, honey. In the Senate, the president of the Senate, which you guys should know, is the vice president of the United States. But y'all, it's a largely ceremonial role. They only vote to break a tie. You have got to know that. And really, you should be able to explain on an FRQ why. It's because they're elected as a member of the executive branch, not the legislative branch, right? Now, oftentimes they are unavailable and they cannot be there. So in their place, the president pro tempore is in charge. And they're the longest serving member of the majority party. Not the oldest, the longest serving, okay? They can vote for everything. And like the speaker, they're also in the order of succession. So is the vice president though, right? But the real power in the Senate, the real power, the real leader is the majority party leader. And that's Chuck Schumer. Okay. That's where the real power is. Since the vice president can't vote, since the president pro tempore is just more ceremonial and they just kind of preside over the meeting, the real power, the real influence is the majority party leader. Okay, you're there? Guys, we're almost done. You're doing really well. I'd like you to know that the House of Representatives is more formally organized. And I hope that makes sense to you. It needs to be, right? And so, for example, you can put underneath that House Rules Committee. The House Rules Committee exists to keep track of debate and to manage the flow of bills. So that's the House Rules Committee. I would know that if I were you.
Can you repeat that?
Happily. So we're writing down that the House is more organized, and part of the way that they are more organized, well, they need to be more organized because they have 435 people, but is through the House Rules Committee, which manages the flow of bills. And rules for debate. Because every representative could not debate. If they did, they would never do anything else. There's way too many of them, right? Go over to the Senate, because for the Senate, I'd like you to know it's less formal. Because it doesn't have to be. They have 400, they have 100 of them. It's far less. And also in the Senate, since it's less formal, you know, that's where the filibuster can take place. You should write that down. Anybody can talk on any bill for however long they want. The filibuster. However, if we want to shut down the filibuster, you must invoke what is called cloture, and that requires a 3/5 vote. So we wrote down 2 House committees, right? House Rules and Ways and Means. Can we write 1 Senate committee that I would know? It's the Judiciary. And if you want to pop back up to where underneath the Senate you wrote can confirm judicial appointments, you could write it there, Senate Judiciary Committee. It's a very powerful, very visible committee. And it's what is called a standing committee, which means it's permanent. It's always there and they always do the same thing. Okay. All right, I'm going to speed through this last section. How a bill becomes a law. Let's just write down a couple of facts, guys. You know that it's got to pass both chambers in the same version before it goes to president, right? So how they do that is they'll have conference committees. To iron out or to reconcile differences. And boy, are there differences in the versions. Of course there are. Sometimes you can have a different party controlling one chamber. So yeah, it's going to be differences. When making bills into a law, you can have things like pork barreling go on. And that's where you try to pass legislation to benefit your state. Pork barreling, remember that? It's good stuff. And then log rolling can go on. And that's just exchange of voting favors. You support my bill, I'll support yours. Okay. Willow, Daddy wants to know if you want Chick-fil-A for lunch. No. She changed her mind. Yes. Okay, sweetheart. And then another term I might know, guys, is markup. That's when changes are made to bills in subcommittee. And then one other term I would know is pigeonhole. And that's when a bill dies in committee. Okay. We okay there? I have 3 minutes. Budget, right? Budget, 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 budget. You should know that it's shared responsibility of the executive and legislative branches. And then I would know a couple of different types of money or spending. You have discretionary spending, where they can decide how much they want to spend. And a good example of discretionary spending, the largest chunk of discretionary spending, by the way, is defense. Okay. Then you have mandatory spending. And it's mandatory because it's required by law. And this is where our entitlement programs come from. So mandatory spending, it's required by law. And it includes things like entitlement programs, which are, you know, like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, I should say. If you meet the qualifications, you're of age, and you put into that fund when you were working, you're entitled to the benefits. Okay. That's by far the biggest chunk of the budget, guys. I mean, it's unreal. It's unreal. And I want to make sure you know the difference between a couple terms. Surplus. You spend less than you generate through revenues, so you have leftover, right? That's a surplus. A deficit, you spend more than you generate. And a lot of people confuse deficit with the national debt. Don't. Deficit contributes to the national debt, which is just what the government owes. Okay. And by the way, when they pass the budget resolution, it's not a law. Okay, it's not a law. And usually they have a hard time passing it, so they just pass appropriation spending. And not surprisingly, one of the most unpopular things to do is to raise taxes. Woo! And now I have to go give a test to US history. How'd we do? You guys okay? I know that was tough, man. That was challenging. Don't forget, we'll do this next Wednesday and Friday, or next Sunday night. Okay. Yeah. So all in good fun. Do you have any questions before you go? I really appreciate you coming. I think you're setting yourself up for success. I value you I think you're wonderful. Have a great senior picnic. Okay. I will not be there because I'm not bringing croup to you. Okay. Yeah. Bye, darlings. So good to see you all. Bye, Malia.